What else do I do? Oh, that's better. Looking for this morning. What are we looking for? Oh, there. Quite long, isn't it?
Good morning.
Good morning. I've had 7 calls from JM, but I was in the shower.
She
So,
said out with her time. She
so
emailed me and said she couldn't get in, but it was too early.
well, exactly. I've got what time is Zoom opening? Are the prayer leaders, Steve and Novia, already there? I had difficulty getting something today. Novia was last minute. Oh, prayer leaders. What time is Zoom opening? I would like to assure Novia, are we meeting with technical concerns?
No, you've
What?
just got the wrong time.
And missed call, I would be in the shower.
Yeah.
So I put what tech concerns? We are open now. There is Novia is there that she was in when I arrived, but I hadn't checked to see who the prayer leaders were there. So we'll just leave her there for a minute or two until we
Right.
get ourselves sorted.
Okay.
But oh, so I don't know what. Well, she was an hour early. Is that it?
Yes. Yeah. She'd got her international time was up the chute.
Up the chute. Yes, 7:51 she texted me, then 7:52, 7:53, 7:58, 7:59, and called me at 7:59. They
I
called
had
me at 8:07. So, um,
I had an email at 7:58.
oh right, I haven't looked at my emails. Oh, I did think I saw one actually. Let's
Yeah.
just see. Of course, back that time of the morning, I'm not hanging on my phone or anything because I go and get
Yeah.
showered, and as most of us do.
Well, I was having my breakfast then, so my phone
Right.
was on charge.
Well, none of us were. We can't get into the room before 8:30 anyway. So,
No.
um,
I suppose that was the thing. She was couldn't get in because of the other meeting. So, oh dear.
she wouldn't get in.
No.
Um, oh, yes, she might get in, but they wouldn't. I better change my name. See, it's Father Lawrence today. Do you want to do the thanks? Because you're happy with Father Lawrence.
Okay. Am I?
Yes. He was your mentor. You're happy with Father Lawrence.
He's probably forgotten all about that a long, long time ago.
Oh dear.
Probably doesn't
Oh,
even remember me now.
pardon?
I said he probably doesn't even remember me now because I've not seen him since.
No, what? 90 something, was it?
No, it was 80 something, late 80s,
Oh
was
my
the last time I
goodness,
saw him.
yes. Oh yes, okay.
Do you want to make me co-host and then I
Oh
can?
yes, sorry, hang on. I'm filing my nails. I was just about to wash the dishes, so I'm all in a tears. I need to be smooth in the morning, Mary.
Right, yes.
Okay, okay.
So we have one.
We've got Novia.
Yeah.
Maybe JM is still sort of an hour out and thinking we're not meeting because she's not there. Oh well. We just need Alan. Let's hope Alan didn't make it an hour early. We're recording, Mary.
Back to getting back to really the essential things, and one of the essential things is our practice of meditation. And so I'll hand over to our prayer leaders now, who will lead us into that. Our prayer leaders are Steve Yazik from Australia and Novia Ong from Indonesia.
O God, come to our assistance.
Señor, date prisa en socorrerme.
O Lord, make haste to help us.
Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
A reading from John Main, The Way of Unknowing. I want now to address a particular question that we all encounter. It is the question of distraction. What should you do when you begin to meditate and distracting thoughts come into your mind? The advice that the tradition has to give is to ignore distractions and to say your word and to keep on saying your word. Don't waste any energy in trying to furrow your brow and say, I will not think of what I'm going to have for dinner or who I'm going to see today or where am I going tomorrow or whatever the distraction may be. Don't try to use any energy to dispel whatever the distraction may be. Simply ignore it. And the way to ignore it is to say your word.
Heavenly Father, open our hearts to the silent presence of the Spirit of your Son. Lead us into that mysterious silence where your love is revealed to all who call, Maranatha, come Lord Jesus.
These are probably all people from World Community.
We can't hear anything.
No, the host has muted us.
I'll have to get the speakers, I think.
So I'm very pleased now to welcome Father Lawrence to give us a talk. And this John Main in the reading this morning said not to give way to distractions. I had this distraction saying, how am I going to introduce Lawrence? I don't know, I'd say my mantra. So now I don't know what to say. But I think that's maybe the great thing about this community is the practice is more important than the words. And Lawrence is a great inspirer for us to practice. So I'll hand over to Lawrence.
Thank you, Stefan. Excellent introduction. Couldn't have been improved on. And can I just say how nice it is to see JM, and welcome back, and also, of course, to welcome back, although she's been back a long time, Magda. Magda, it's great to see you.
Oh, we've got Lawrence. We've got cut off the sound.
Oh, no. Actually, no. I was not. How did you hear me? Because I was muted.
I heard you before until you said put up to Magda, and then it cut off.
Oh, okay. I just thought of that. I would like to ask you also to keep in your hearts. You may have already prayed for them. The Schofield family in Montreal, especially for the moment, Dominic, who was one of the first children to meditate. I think at 6 years old when we arrived in Montreal. His wife died last week, and after quite a long illness, and leaving him and the two children, two young teenage children. So I ask you to keep them in your prayer. So, what I'd like to talk about, well, I should take my watch off first, so that because it's a big topic and one could talk a long time about it, in fact, endlessly, is obedience. Obedience. And it's such an important principle of Benedictine life and the rule, the language, the thought structures, the symbolism of the rule. We really do need to think very carefully about what it means. And I think it's a very important aspect of all human relationships, not only in the monastery, in a marriage, in the workplace. So how do we understand in public life as well? Do we obey the standards of public life, for example? This big question that keeps on coming up in politics today. So what do we mean by obedience? How can we relate it or understand it perhaps a little better through meditation? And how can we contribute in a very unstable and disturbed world, culture that we live in? How can we make a small contribution to the world in which, as we touch it through our families, through our work, through our institutions, how can we make a small contribution to making the idea of obedience a little more comprehensible So the chapter, Benedict and the Rule gives a whole chapter to obedience, chapter 5. And I'll just remind you, I'll just run through that first and then look at some of these other broader questions. What does Benedict say? Well, he's pretty definite that obedience is important. He says, the first step of humility is unhesitating obedience. Obedientia sine mora, without delay. Now, what's your first reaction to that? The first step of humility is unhesitating obedience. Do what you're told and do it straight away. No, don't argue, just do it. That's one way of looking at it, or rather military, or the way a parent might speak to a 2-year-old child who's discovering that they have an ego. Just do it, get on with it and stop moaning. Well, you can also have, much later in life, we can still be controlled by that image of obedience. The first step of humility is unhesitating obedience. Now, I think the ego quite naturally resists what that might imply, that I just have to do what I'm told and not argue about it. Blind obedience. And that is really offensive at one level, and it's very likely to make our ego or our personality react against it. But listen to the second part of the first sentence. The first step of humility is unhesitating obedience, which comes naturally to those who cherish Christ above all. Completely different context here then. So this unhesitating obedience is something that it comes to us naturally. You don't even have to struggle with it, he says. It comes naturally if we cherish Christ above all, prefer nothing to Christ, as he says somewhere else. So I think very clearly obedience is not, as the ego might fear, a way of humiliating us.
These headphones on.
But
Just a
there we are. Obedience, it does not mean something that's going to humiliate us or make us into a doormat or take away our dignity. That's not the kind of obedience Benedict is talking about. Because this is something that grows, this capacity for obedience grows in us from our true nature. It's natural. It means it comes out of our true nature when we are Christ-centered, when we cherish Christ above all. So the first thing to say is that obedience in this understanding is not primarily a hierarchical thing or a institutional thing. It isn't about psychological dependency or subordination or making people feel, inferior. Not at all. It is a mystical, a deeply spiritual state. But we have to understand it. And of course, Benedict also places this acquisition of obedience, or this growth of obedience in us, he places that in the context of ordinary life, community life, situations that we are running into every day. If you're living, the more you're living with a group of people, living with your family, living with your work colleagues, living in a physical community, like here at Bombo, every day you're constantly running into these encounters in which you are invited or challenged or have the opportunity to grow this central quality of obedience. And then he says, why do we, he addresses this question of what's our motivation for being obedient, for wanting to become obedient? Because of the holy service they have professed. The first thing, the holy service they have professed or promised. What does that mean? I think you could say it means the service to Christ in the monastery, in the community, in your family, in your workplace, in whatever commitment you've made. You've professed something, you've made a commitment. So, and you serve through that commitment. And you know, it's also because you're part of a team. The word service in Latin would probably have made people think of military service. So, you know, and the essential thing about obedience in the military is that you're part of a team. It's a hierarchy. Life is hierarchical in many aspects, but it's basically because you're part of a team. And when, we all know, when a team works together well, there is a kind of mutual obedience. And Benedict has another chapter on this very topic, that the brothers must be obedient to one another. So there is a hierarchical aspect. Do what you're told. If the house is on fire, and the superior says, "Go and call the fire brigade," you don't say, "Well, it's not my job to call the fire brigade. It's so and so's job." So obedience is something that holds the group together, creates a community, creates, we would say, a Christ-centered team. The second reason that we want to develop this quality of obedience is because of dread of hell. Now, we probably dismiss that because, you know, we don't think of going to hell so much these days, or God sending us to hell because we have lots of sins we haven't paid for yet. So, and even though that image is very strong, going to hell and fear of hell, and it can be very, very crippling fear for people brought up in an old religiosity. Nevertheless, we are very familiar with hell because in our culture, because of the high level of mental illness, of depression, and God knows the atrocities that are happening around the world. The incarceration of the Uyghur Muslims in northwest China, you know, atrocities every day that's happening. I heard the other day, and even at a smaller level, I heard of I was talking to a young man who had alcoholic who had gone on a binge recently and ended up in the street. And when he woke up, he discovered that everything, most of what he had with him had been stolen. And somebody came up to him and said, "Would you like some coke and drugs?" And he said, yeah. So he handed over some money, and then the person ran off with his last bit of money that he had in his pocket. So, I mean, that's hell. It's certainly a very good image of hell. So, so we practice obedience in order to avoid being in hell, to avoid being locked into a state of isolation, alienation, hostility, constant conflict, constant friction, or just plain cruelty that human beings can express to each other. And the third reason, and we would say actually also the hell of being trapped in your own will. And in the prologue, Benedict talks about obedience in the first few lines and goes on to speak about how through the labor of obedience, we are able to be freed from being subordinated to our ego, to our own individual will. Or as he says, was this translated, just following your own whims and desires or appetites. So that's another kind of hell. And the third reason that he gives for wanting to develop this quality of obedience is for the glory of everlasting life. And again, that's a phrase that we might sort of just think of as it's about heaven, it's about some reward that we get. But I think we're better able today with a contemplative perspective to see that it's not about what happens after death, it's about how this present life is transformed so that we are able to live with freedom, the glory of the children of God, to live with freedom and a sense of fulfillment, that life, with all its difficulties, can be a taste of freedom, of the liberty of the children of God, and a feeling of fulfillment. So this is just the first 3 or 4 lines of chapter 5. I think we can see that that obedience is a lot more than just doing what you're told. However, Benedict is expressing this mystical insight in very daily, communal, realistic sort of terms. As we know from the rule, everything about the rule is living this out in daily life. And so he says, these are our motives as we live in community for carrying out the superior's order as promptly as if the command came from God himself. Well, that has been abused many times over the centuries, in the same way that all power can become abused, or we can misunderstand what those kind of relationships are about. So, if the superior tells you to jump off the top of the bell tower and that's God telling you to do it, well, clearly no one in their right mind would think like that. But again, so we have to look into what he's saying here, that in daily life, we need to be quick to respond to the needs of the moment as expressed in our relationships with each other. And that may be somebody says, look, would you get the lunch ready half an hour earlier today because somebody's coming? That you respond to that quickly, naturally. And what does it mean? Is this God telling you to do this? Well, it is touching a deep place in you where your relationship with God, your living and having your being in God is the central reality. So in that sense, that moment where you're asked to get the lunch ready half an hour earlier, and that's a bit annoying because you had planned to do it differently, but you can connect that request to the deeper peacefulness and the deeper meaningfulness of your life as a whole. So he says also that what impels people to live in this way, developing the quality of obedience, is love. Is love. Love impels them so that they become eager to take the narrow road, a narrow road that leads to life, as Jesus said. Not giving in to their own whims and appetites, but walking according to their relationship with others. Obedience is about living a relational life rather than being just controlled by our own ego. And he makes the point, people who live in community choose this. They choose to live in a community with the structure of the community as it is, and to live under the rule. That's a free choice. Nobody's forcing them to do it. And all of this, of course, is related to the central model of human development, which is Christ himself. Christ, who was obedient even unto death, as the St. Paul says. And then he goes on to describe that obedience is not just about doing what you're told. It's about doing it in a certain way. It's about responding to the needs of the moment as expressed through your relationships with other people. And you have to hope that other people who are asking you to do something are decent people, and that they're healthy people, and they're not making you feel inferior because of the way they're asking you to do something. You have to hope that they also are learning to be obedient. But then he says, if you respond to these moments where you see a growth opportunity to become obedient, then do it with a willing heart. Do it peacefully and happily, not cringing, not sluggish, not half-hearted, and above all, don't grumble. Non-murmurare, he said. Do not murmur. He's murmuring several times in the rules. He remarks on murmuring as a kind of a real poison in the life of the community. People don't say out aloud what they're feeling to the person they should say it to, but they bottle it up and then they start murmuring and gossiping. So even in the heart, he says, even if you just don't murmur out loud, don't murmur in your heart either. So this challenge to be obedient is one that takes you really to the core of an inner purification. So there are two issues I'd like to end on. One is, who is the oblate obedient to when they don't live in a Benedictine community physically? What does obedience is pretty clear when you have a structured life of a regular community living together. But what is obedience in this sense to the oblate? Clearly, the oblate has to be obedient. But how? How is that lived? And how is it expressed? And it needs to be even more interiorized in the oblate life outside of the monastery or outside of the community. It needs to be more deeply interiorized if it's not just to become a kind of a platitude, if it's meant to be a real precept, not just a platitude. So that's one question for another occasion. The other question is, does Benedict's idea of obedience, the way he describes it, conflict with contemporary culture and psychology? And certainly some of the ways he describes it is from a very traditional, pre-modern, hierarchical kind of structure of command. But as I've tried to suggest, I think there is much more in what he's saying than just an external hierarchy. The word obedience, as you all know, comes from the word audire, to listen, or to pay attention to. We are disobedient when we fear, when our ego is too weak, when we're oversensitive, or when we are insensitive to the message that's coming to us, that we can't hear it. We simply can't pay attention to it because we don't hear it, because you ask somebody to do something and it just, it's like a bomb going off in their psyche. They're oversensitive to. So it isn't always about doing things, of course, do this or do that. But these moments where we really understand how obedient we are is when our will, our personal will, is challenged. And we are asked to do something that we don't want to do, or to do it now rather than to do it later. And these life, and this is the beauty of Benedict's vision of life, life is constantly giving you opportunities every day, hundreds of them, testing moments, showing how your relationship with yourself, your own healing, with the world, with other people, people you live or work with, and your relationship with God, the ground of your being, how that is, how that's going. These are litmus tests. Here in Bonneau, we take our temperature every day at the beginning of the day because of COVID. And you know, these moments during the day when our quality of obedience is tested, these are like testing moments. Of course, the person giving the command, as Benedict says, or the person asking you to do something, and there's a very different way of doing that in modern culture, modern psychology, but the one giving the command needs to be very well trained in obedience herself, to put it across in the best way and respond in the best way, both psychologically and spiritually, with gentleness, with clarity, with patience. So, as Benedict says about the abbot has to obey the rule and listen to the community. So, obedience is a relational quality of how we live together and how we listen to the word of God sounding through each other. And it's not only about doing, it may be about seeing that somebody is in need, that somebody needs your attention or needs a little bit of intervention without invading their space. And that is also obedience, not being frightened to respond to the needs of the moment, even if they're not consciously expressed. And finally, you know, meditation teaches us what obedience is from the very first moment. And meditation, the regular practice of meditation, develops this quality of obedience in us as a more and more as a habit of mind, as it brings out our true nature, as it deals with and heals what needs to be dealt with and healed in our own baggage and the purification process, so that we gain in confidence to be ourselves and to act naturally. Remember, obedience is a natural response from the other-centered person. Person who's other-centered is naturally obedient. And in meditation, what are we obedient to? Well, of course, we're obedient to the practice, the daily practice. But within that practice, we are listening to the mantra in the purest obedience. So saying the mantra, sounding the mantra, listening to the mantra in those times of meditation is the purest obedience, and it makes us obedient in all the situations of our daily life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. So much in that talk, which we could go over again and listen to again. It's on will be on YouTube. And the questions you posed about where is obedience in the oblate life. I mean, you've given us a prompting to try and seek to answer that for ourselves, and to see our meditation practice as a way of opening our hearts so that we can listen and be more attentive in our lives to what God and others are prompting us to. So thank you for that. And I'll hand back to our prayer leaders. Moment, remember Steve from Australia and Novia from Indonesia to bring the meeting to an end with this time of prayer.
May the divine assistance remain always with us.
With all absent brothers and sisters. Amen.
And it just leaves me to say a big thank you to Stefan for hosting today, to our two prayer leaders for leading us so beautifully in prayer, and to Father Lawrence, who always inspires and uplifts. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Lawrence.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bless you.
Nice week.
Bye.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
God
God bless.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So was it the comments that reaching
Thank you, Father Lawrence.
in general, right?
Yeah.
Obedience. So true.
Marianne. Hi, Magda. Hi.
Yes, Jem?
Hi, everybody.
Marianne, my device is not cooperating. Will you
Right.
do me the biggest favor of copying
Yes,
the
I
chat
will.
messages?
Yes, no problem.
Grazie. Thank you.
Good to see you, JM.
Hi, Magda. Hi, Fred. I am much better. Thank you
Have
for
a
your
nice week. God bless all of you.
Thank you.
Take care.
And you.
Thank you, Julia. To the last
Oh.
minute.
Yes, okay, JM.
This is incredible, but we'll see. Maybe
Well,
I need to.
Alan, did you see Alan came in, JM?
No, I didn't. But he has
did.
put us on YouTube. Did you
Yeah.
notice?
Oh, only 8 minutes. But he said he will be able to do the whole thing, so he'll send me the link later.
Oh,
So,
wonderful, wonderful.
good. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia, for being patient with my.
Okay, it's okay.
I'll find holy water and bless all of it.
Yeah, sprinkle it all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. God bless. See you
Thank
next
you.
week.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes, thank you. See you next week. Baboosh.
Bye.
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 I'm going to stop the recordings now, Julia.
Oh, sorry.